Good morning, everyone. It's very good to see you all here. Again, I'm always really happy and feel so blessed that you show up this early in the morning. I'm an early riser, so I've already been up for a few hours, and these Tuesday morning sessions have come to feel very sacred to me. So thanks for coming. I don't even know how many we've done so far. This might be session number 7 or 8. And this past week, since I last saw you, I've been reflecting quite a bit on the role that relationship plays in our own recovery. And this is something that I kind of brought to the forefront a few weeks ago. When I mentioned that I read this article that indicated that what human beings need now more than ever, if we were to just sort of boil it down to 2 things, it's a sense of safety and a sense of connection. And if those are our top 2 needs right now, they've really, really been threatened over the course of the last 8 or 9 weeks. And regionally, if you're here in the Northeast Pennsylvania, it's likely that our connection or our ability to connect in the ways that we're most used to are going to continue to be compromised. So that said, how do we maintain and sustain connection that's very supportive of our recovery during a time when we can't be together? I was stunned over the weekend to see the sheer amount of people that in their home states, where some of the restrictions were loosened up, had just sort of gone wild with it. And to see, photographs of people on beaches and not doing any kind of social distancing, and even sort of driving around locally and seeing people out and about, and social distancing practices look like they're being really relaxed even here where we're still at high risk. And I was really starting to wonder about that. And I know that I'm really craving social interaction to the point where it sort of feels like and I'm sure I'm not alone, would take risks to be together with people that I love. And I only bring that up because if you 2 are feeling that pull, I think that that's what it's about. It really speaks to how important it is for us to get to connect face to face, to get to connect in ways where human touch is easy. And when we look back on all of this, before it started, what we take for granted relationally. So this is a really good time for us to start to think about intentionality in our relationships. I'm doing some work related to leadership right now, and really asking the leaders that I work with to consider using this period of time to sort of make the internal changes that they know that they need to make so that they can be more effective. And that a lot of those changes are related to changing ways of being and ways of leading that are going to deepen and enhance their relationships with those that they lead. Because I think that as time moves forward, when we think about what life is going to be like once we are back into the workplace, back connecting, that we're going to discover the necessity of having to live and operate in our relationships very differently. And what would it mean and how would it feel to take this opportunity to step into our current relationships and new relationships from a place of health and from a place where we are protecting our well-being. So I actually want to go back and bring some slides in. These are slides that we were working with a couple of weeks ago, but sort of got detoured a little bit. My fault, I tend to do that. So this is a slide that I presented a couple of weeks ago, and it hasn't really changed, that Our human connections are really vulnerable during periods of life where there's high stress. And at the same time, we need them now more than ever. And we need them to be healthy and we need them to be stable. Remembering those three rules: they need tending to, they need prioritization, and they need protection. The last thing that many of us are thinking about is, how do I tend to my most important relationships? How do I prioritize them and how do I protect them? Because many of us are just trying to figure out, how do I live in this new way, in this new world? So one of the things that we know personally and relationally is that whenever we feel threatened, afraid, stress response takes over and puts us into fight, flee, or freeze. We all know what fight feels like. We all know what running feels like. And sometimes a version of flight, especially since we can't go anywhere, is just a shutting down, a withdrawing, a going numb, a getting really quiet. And then there is that freezing where we fortress ourselves. We just sort of build a wall and we remain frozen. And it's really akin to what animals do in the wild when they're really stressed, especially in the presence of a predator that might pounce or might aim to kill the animal. They freeze, they play dead. Think about the times in your life. I know I can think of several where I played dead. You're alive, you're walking around, but you feel like the walking dead because you've gone into frozen mode. You've gone into paralysis mode as a way of maintaining your own survival. So we do this. We have tremendous capacity to do this. We are born to do this. And we are grateful that we have the capacity to fight when we need to leave when we need to freeze when we need to. But when stress or threat is chronic, as it is now for so many of us, it's so chronic that we might actually feel used to it at this point. When it's chronic, we start to see these stress responses showing up in how we relate to people that we love. So we do know factually, and this was a suspicion, but it's come to pass, that there are individuals who are in danger in their own homes because they are quarantined with individuals that abuse them. So reports of domestic violence right now are much higher. Levels of anger and irritability, agitation in homes where people are all living together are much higher right now, because we're not accustomed to that kind of intense relating in the context of what's going on here. Our routine is upset. We don't know what's going to happen next. I may or may not have a job. I mean, there's just so many things going on that impact our family and relational systems. And then for those of us who are living alone, we might feel depressed. We also might feel a little bit frayed around the edges, a little more irritable, agitated, and even anxious. The longer that this goes on, I am learning that my anxiety level is through the roof compared to how I felt about our current situation 8 weeks ago. So that's how it's manifesting for me. The question becomes, how does that spill over into the relationships that I really need right now for support, especially in support of my recovery? This is why for many of us, online versions of our 12-step programs, conference calls can feel like a haven, can feel like an oasis in the middle of the desert, because we know that we can be with people. I know that I find my anxiety level just completely dropping into the ground during those meetings. And you might be finding a similar kind of solace, where you're able, for maybe just an hour, to come out of fight, to come out of flee, to come out of freeze. So a really important question to ask when you're thinking not just about your own tendency, because we all have a tendency. We can all do these things. For example, many of us are really, really good. It's our default to go into fight when we're feeling a lot of stress. For some of us, we're runners. I'm a runner. I will flee or I will freeze. And I think I mentioned here a few weeks ago that there is a fourth F that's really, really important to us who have a very strong inclination toward codependency, and that is to fawn. If you remember, fawning is, I will say and do and give everything that I think that you most want and need in order to preserve the relationship or in order to survive our situation. So when you think about your own stress response, again, we're capable of doing all four of these things. But what is your go-to? What is your default? So you ask that question of yourself, and then you say, do I also do that in the context of my relationships that can get really stressed? And you might find that your stress response is different depending on the relationship. You might find it strange that, wow, primarily I'm a runner. You know, when things get really hard in the relationship, I will leave the room, I will leave the conversation, I will leave the relationship. And yet, in another close and important relationship, you might be a fighter. Or yet with another person in another relationship, you might be fawning. Or in another relationship that's really important to you, you might find that in the presence of stress, for example, if it's around a conflict, you totally freeze. And that freezing not only happens physically, we feel ourselves sort of turning in and protecting, but it also can happen cognitively. If you've ever been cognitively frozen, that's when you have the experience of someone saying you're doing something and you know, wow, I really need to sort of defend myself here or put up a boundary, and you're completely incapable. The words don't form. It's as if the brain is completely frozen and you cannot respond. You can't even react. So in what ways is the stress response, or does the stress response show up in your relationships? That's really the question that I wanted to bring to our session here today. I want to introduce to you what are called the four deadly horsemen of the apocalypse. And this is really about relational dynamics. But before we do this, I want to take a moment and sort of check in and ask, a few of you to share a little bit here. How does the stress response show up for you in your relationships? You can unmute yourselves. Anyone?
Christine, it's Helen.
Hey.
How are you today?
Good.
Thank you for doing this for us, Christine. I could tell you my gut on this immediate response is that my default stress response is definitely to come out swinging. Mm-hmm. So I I fight, which I think is really ironic because I feel like that was suppressed in me when I was a kid, when I was younger. And, you know, it was like you just couldn't do that. Internally, I was doing it all the time. But as an adult, I come out swinging under stress. It's been in a good way. I mean, like I've been able to moderate that behavior and make it work in a good way. But this has caught this whole situation that we're in has caused me to think of what is it that I can do to serve in this situation. But I'm like fighting the world and then just collapsing. You know what I mean? Like doing everything I can, then just completely collapsing. So I think that's my gut.
Thank you. So I think one of the things that's interesting about what you said is when you were younger, you were fighting on the inside.
Yeah.
You weren't necessarily, wow, what a toll that takes. Because at least when we fight, I know fighters who will say, I have to fight to get it out. Even if I know that the fighting really isn't going to make a difference and might in fact make things work. I have to get it out. There is an energy that accompanies the fight that is overwhelming and exhausting, utterly exhausting. In fact, I'm wondering if it's even true to say that there is an energy associated with the fleeing and the freezing and the fawning that's equally draining. I'm gonna change my lighting here because the sun has come out. Can you even see me?
It's that little misty thing that we had last time.
Okay, I think it's part of this room is so dark at 7 o'clock and then it just lights up.
Right. Sure.
I will be right back. Just take
okay.
Okay, maybe I'll just move a little bit. So anyone else, how does stress response show up in your relationships?
Hi, Christine, it's me, Kelly.
Hi.
Hey, Cal.
So
Ooh.
I'm about the 4 different ways. I believe that I'm each of those ways. Coming out swinging, I think, has been a huge problem for me, but I didn't know any other way. And the fleeing is all I know too, so like just running. But today, like I'm running with everything that's been available and is available. But I find like what you're talking about, like the stress, I all of a sudden feel like just I need to be near somebody, just for like more mental like support. And that's not me, but I know that I can't do either anymore. It's not getting me anywhere but in trouble when you come out swinging or you just run. So fortunately, I do have help every day here, and I ask how to handle and respond to certain things because I got to admit, I just don't know another way. So I do ask for the help, I'm given the help, and then I just go by what they tell me to do. So that's the best chance that I have, along with all the other help here. So thank you.
You're welcome. And really that's, to some degree, that's what we're all doing is just being aware, this is what I do. It's not working. I'm not even quite sure what to do instead, but I'm willing to try on different ways. And that commitment is everything. There's the mindfulness piece, which is having the awareness that this is what I do. And sometimes just having the language for it sometimes just being able to go through the 4 F's, think about the next time you're feeling relational strain or anger or high levels of irritation. If you just took a moment and you sort of step away and you ask yourself, which of the 4 stress responses are present here right now that I'm bringing in? And it's really illuminating when you start to look at the other person you're dealing with or the other people you're dealing with, and you're seeing where they're coming from. If you are around and you've been around historically, especially in your first family or your family of origin, people who are primarily fear-driven, you're going to notice that fear response is higher than it's ever been, maybe in your lifetime. And then you think about how that can really, really shake up your own sobriety, your own program. So in a lot of ways, here we are disconnected from each other in our communities, our recovery communities, scrambling to find ways to stay connected. And part of that, and the need for that, is the people around us that aren't in recovery, might be in full-blown stress response now for 8 or 9 weeks. And we're trying to meet that in a really healthy and stabilizing way without getting triggered by it. So it's all very complicated. There's so many things going on right now that we have to contend with. One other person, how is stress response? And I just to make sure, I did not introduce the 4 deadly horsemen, did I?
No.
Okay, good. I've been doing a lot of teaching, and sometimes I forget what I was sharing with what group. So this is a game changer. So you have something to look forward to, even though it sounds scary and tragic. The 4 deadly horsemen of the apocalypse. Is one other person who might want to share about how you see the stress response showing up relationally?
Hi, Christine. I'm Liza.
Hi, Liza.
I could definitely, as you were talking, as Helen was talking and Kelly was talking, definitely my relation, has changed in the workplace, because just from the simple fact that most of the people I work with are working from home every day. We only have 1 person in the office, maybe 2 every day if we have a lot of work. But otherwise, so we have this kind of complicated system, because they have a system designed for work from home, but I don't think it was designed to be used all the time and at the great volume it's being used by everyone in the company. So it gets slowed down. So I'm trying to send phone calls that come into me at the main phone through the system to the people working at home, and they don't always get through. So sometimes, especially after hours, after they get off the system, if a situation has to be communicated, I do it with my own cell phone. Well, guess who left their cell phone at home yesterday? And I was all the way to work, so there was no going back. So I get to work, and I think this isn't really going to be a big deal. And actually, for most of the day, I was fine, because I'm not that attached to my cell phone and that kind of thing. It really wasn't a problem. Things were going okay at work. Well, don't you know, as soon as everybody's off the phones and off their systems, we get like 3 calls that have to be addressed. And usually I text my supervisor with this information, because it's people that are going to have to be attended to that night, at least called back. So I'm like, okay, what am I going to do here? All right. So I know that at the one and the other, at the nursing department, they have her phone number. So I get her cell phone number so I can call her. So I tell her, look, I don't have my cell phone. I'm going to give you these 3 situations. And then apparently the one other coworker of mine was still trying to do work, and he didn't know I didn't have my cell phone. So now he's trying to text me, apparently. So eventually he figured out I wasn't answering my texts. I don't know what he thought, but so we got that figured out. Then my boss calls and tells me what really hit was when my boss called me and said, I need you to go in my office and turn off my computer and restart it, because she was trying to get onto the computer and she couldn't get onto it because something was going on with the main computer. So Now I had to get the security guard because I don't have a key for her office because we changed the way we were doing things a few months ago. And the other receptionist is the only one with the key to her office. And they lock the office when she leaves for the day. So I get the security guard up there and I go in, and now I'm trying to figure out her computer, which is different from mine. Every computer's a little, we don't all have the same computer at work. So now I'm looking, and then I finally realize that it doesn't turn on the way mine does. So I can't, now I'm trying, okay, now I know where the power button is, but I'm getting more stressed now because now there's technology involved that I don't know. So I said, I think I know where the button should be to turn it back on, because I don't think the power is even onto the computer. That's the problem. So I'm trying to get, and then the light is dim in the room and I can't see the way she has it set up in her office, where the button might be. Well, at any rate, I was getting really stressed. I'm like yelling at the computer. I'm like, where is this button? Because I'm like, I need to get it back on for her, because then she's got to take care of all of this. She's like, call me when you get it, when you get it back on. So finally you get it back on. But that was like a whole stress response. But it was okay. Everything worked out okay as far as I know. I guess she took care of everything else, because I called and told her your computer wasn't even on. I think that's what the problem was. So I turned it on for her, which I guess screws up the whole system when she tries to access it at home because the main computer's not on in her office. So we got that all straightened out, but that was definitely a stress response. And I guess it was kind of a fight response because I'm yelling at the computer and I'm, still inside chat. Now I'm chastising myself. You idiot, you left your cell phone home. Like the one time it's going to happen that, you really could have used being able to text somebody and that kind of thing, instead of trying to make all these phone calls. And, like we got 2 other phone calls. So I'm like, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
We're trying to, get this all taken care of, because of course, and then of course, I take on like, oh shit, if you don't get this straightened out the one time that you actually have something to do in the evening and you can't, and it's like a little inefficient, but it got taken care of. But I guess that was kind of a fight response. I would say most of the time I have a flight or withdrawal response, but that was definitely like a fight response. That's all I have.
Thank you for that. What I really appreciate about your story is in no part of the story did you share or indicate that you were hard on yourself or came into fight or flight or freeze in terms of your relationship to you, because that's an entirely different level of thinking about all this as well. And when you think about your relationship to you, when you're feeling stress, do you fight yourself? Do you leave yourself? Do you freeze and shut down and totally disconnect from yourself? And we'll talk about that a little bit more today toward the end. But I want to introduce you to what are called the 4 deadly horsemen of the apocalypse. And I want to give you a little bit of background information on this model. So this model really introduces us to 4 different styles of the way that we might find ourselves communicating with others, that if they are not nipped in the bud, if they are not corrected, can lead to the apocalypse of the relationship, meaning the exploding of the relationship, the disintegration of the relationship, the end of the relationship. So the 4 deadly horsemen of the apocalypse comes from the work of John Gottman, and he and his wife have an institute, I believe it's in Washington State, where primarily they study marriage and long-term committed relationships. And part of their early work in the 1980s, when they sort of really began to study relational dynamics between committed partners, they came up with, or they recognized that there's this common theme in the way that couples who are at high risk tend to communicate with each other. And the study over time, they collected so much data that they are almost able to predict whether or not two people will stay together, divorce, separate, leave the relationship with compelling accuracy, strictly by watching how they communicate with each other. Now, how does this relate to us? You can apply this certainly to a long-term committed relationship if you're in one. You will likely see this if you've been in a marriage and are not in that marriage anymore, that these dynamics were present. You might also see these dynamics manifesting in your relationship with your child, your relationship with a close friend, your relationship with a colleague. An entire organization can blow up or just perform at a very, very low level if this way of communicating is part of the culture there. So we can, this is not information that is just relegated to an intimate relationship. You can apply this to all relationships. Now, the idea is that these dynamics build upon each other. So they kind of happen sequentially. So in other words, if I start to notice that the first horseman has arrived, that first dynamic is present in how we communicate with each other, I can say to myself, oh man, the first horseman is here. We really need to do something about this. Once you get to the third and fourth horseman, it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult to resolve and to heal. Is it possible? Absolutely. But only amongst two people who are willing to acknowledge we really need to work on this, or we need to bring a close to this relationship. The four horsemen are not going to surprise you. They're not going to surprise you, but they are going to wake you up to how critical and how destructive these ways of communicating can operate inside of a relationship. So here they are. And these are ways of communicating that don't just show up in your verbals. They show up in the way that you're thinking about another person. They show up in your behavior toward that person or with that person. They show up in your nonverbal communication. I would say that they show up in these other ways far more than they show up in what you are actually verbalizing. So they are, in their order, criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and what is called stonewalling. So criticism, all of these things at some degree are very common in all relationships. You've done this. You've been the recipient of these things. It's been part of your dynamic. But again, when it becomes very dominant in the way you're communicating with each other and very chronic, you're headed towards trouble. So criticism, very overtly, I guess a mild version of this is just picking on someone that you care about, picking on a child, picking on your partner, nitpicking at a colleague, overtly criticizing them about things they say, things they do, what they've not said, what they've not done. When criticism becomes part of your tone, or when you find that you're really thinking about your partner or your child or your colleague in a really critical way, just kind of catch it, because it's not comfortable for you to be like that. It's not comfortable for us. It doesn't feel good to be critical, to feel critical, to be thinking in critical ways about another person, the energy of criticism doesn't feel good. There's criticism and there's feedback. Feedback feels so much better. There's nothing wrong with saying to someone, saying to someone something about what they're doing that frustrates you or irritates you or agitates you. That's different. Giving feedback about that is different than being critical. Watch criticism play out between two people that you know. And you might be able to, the faces of a couple you might know might come to mind right now, where you can, yeah, that dynamic is present in their relationship. Or, wow, when I look back at that period of time in my daughter's preteen years, how critical I was. And I look back at that and I can think, what stress was happening in my life that made that part of my dynamic with her? We can almost always contextualize any of these dynamics in some sort of ongoing stress that was occurring. Remember, your stress will spill over into your relationships. The reason that this is important is when I was doing work with couples who were thinking about separating or divorcing, we call this discernment coaching. It's sort of like you're in this discernment phase. Should we stay? Should we depart? Almost in every case that I've worked with, when you hear each person describe what they think the problems are and how long ago the problems began, it's usually about 5 to 7 years prior these issues began, but the couple let them fester until they got to a point where they will seek intervention. It usually takes about 5 to 7 years, which is really astounding to me, but at the same time, very believable. But when you say to them, what was going on in your lives, especially in your lives as a couple, that was really stressful at the time that you just sort of started to note the shift, which perpetuated a drift of sorts or a lot of fighting or wherever it is. And most of the time, if not all of the time, they will tell a story about something exceptionally stressful that was happening, and they had no awareness that that stress was spilling over into their dynamic. And when two people can see it in that way, you have a very, very strong opportunity to help them to heal the relationship. And then sometimes it's just too far gone. But when you do your own reflection and you're thinking about, wow, that was a relationship where there was a lot of critical exchanges happening, or I was just barraged with criticism by this person I was in relationship with. What was going on then? That may have been a huge stressor in that person's life, or in your family life, or in your professional lives, or whatever it is. So it usually begins with criticism. Criticism very naturally leads to defensiveness. Just think about it. When someone is critical of you, what do? Right? You don't open yourself up to it, you defend. So now, we've got criticism present and defensiveness present. As soon as I believe that I must take a defensive posture, emotionally, even physically, in this relationship with you, we're headed for trouble. The second horseman has arrived. Again, it's very normal for there to be episodes of criticism that are followed by defense. But when this is a chronic way that you're communicating with each other, you will go into shutdown. in the defensiveness, or you'll become the fighter. You have to find a way to save yourself, to buffer yourself from all of the criticism. And that's exhausting. Defensiveness is exhausting. And when I come into defensiveness in a chronic way, I really start to, again, you want to think about posturally folding into yourself. You're defending your heart. You're defending everything about you that you need to be vulnerable, that you need to be intimate. And I'm not just talking here about physical, sexual intimacy. I'm talking about relational intimacy, to be close to you and to feel really fulfilled by this relationship. I have to be present with my heart. I'm not present with the heart when the heart is defended. I'm present with a defended heart. So you can already start to see, even though the second horseman has arrived, so we're only at number 2, you can start to see how we're nearing the apocalypse. Just imagine, you may have grown up in a family like this, watching, maybe this was the dynamic in your family between your parents. Imagine watching that and living in that energy. And the toll that that takes, and worse, what it teaches you. What does it teach you about what it means to be in a marriage, in a close relationship, in a family? I also want to mention criticism and defensiveness can show up in sibling relationships. And I'm not kidding, I thank God daily that I did not have any of this present with any of my siblings, and I don't know why that is. It's really quite a miracle of sorts. Sometimes I wonder if there was something dysfunctional about the fact that we never fought. We were really, really there in support of each other, and it continues to be that way. But I have heard so many stories over the course of my life about things that happen in sibling relationships that were allowed to happen because it's like the leaders of the family were totally offline, completely checked out. It is parental responsibility, or the responsibility of the grown-up in the situation, to take note when criticism and defensiveness is part of a sibling dynamic, because it can create, or it can have repercussions that you carry into your adult life. For example, sibling bullying, sibling abuse. So this is like criticism and defensiveness that was just allowed to go on and just became a very normal part of a family's dynamic. You'll notice that I have the word contempt in bold, and there's a reason for that, because once you get to contempt, third horseman has arrived and you're in trouble. Very difficult to walk back from or heal from contempt. Contempt is, I'm married to you and I hate you. Contempt is the mere sound of you chewing your food across the table irritates me. Contempt is, we are out with a group of people sharing a meal, and we treat each other in front of everyone else with such hostility and such reprehensible language and energy that it's like poison to the whole table. I know you've been in situations where you've left social situations, thought, man, I need to go home and take a shower after that. I can't even believe that this is the way that these people treat each other. Or I can't believe that this is a family system within which this, pre-adult child is abusing the whole family in public, and we're all witness to it. And we leave and we think, that was so uncomfortable and so terrible. And that is the bleeding over of contempt. The word contempt itself it's actually a perfect word to describe what contempt is, because the saying of it carries a tone that we just sort of recoil from. We've all felt it. We've all expressed it. We've all been the recipient of it. But it's so toxic. Very toxic in family systems when children are exposed to the energy of contempt, because it's scary. And again, it's not something that we want to be around. So you want to think about, and maybe you were one of these kids where going to school, like you dreaded breaks, because going to school felt a whole lot better than being at home, because you were marinating in the energy of the contempt that existed between your parents, caregivers, or your other siblings. So I want to take a pause here, and I just want to check in and see if any of these resonate with you before I talk about stonewalling, which is a very natural outcome of criticism, defensiveness, and contempt being present. Anybody? Can you see how stress might cause you to communicate in a way that is critical, defensive, contemptuous? Yeah. So there's lots of different ways that you can introduce these patterns. You can use them diagnostically. When you're aware that a relationship is feeling off or in trouble, and you can sort of go through them and ask, oh, wow, which of the horsemen are here right now? And what do I need to do before we get to the apocalypse? When I've introduced these 4 dynamics over the course of the last 8 weeks to different groups, one of the things that has come forward several times was this real awakening for families that are home right now with their kids doing homeschooling and simultaneously trying to do their own work, like having to be in charge of the homeschooling, in some cases teaching their kids content that they don't even know themselves, and also trying to save their businesses or continue to do their work virtually, and with the recognition that they've become really critical, or they wake up every morning already in a defensive mode, or feeling this contemptuous energy between themselves and their partner. I read this really interesting article that was published in the New York Times. I think it was just last week. And the title was something like, I don't want to be the good mother, or I don't want to be the fun mother. That's what it was. And it was a narrative from a woman who talked about the fact that she always knew that she wasn't the fun parent. Her husband traveled a lot. They both work outside of the home and have really stressful jobs. But the kids are always most excited when daddy came home because daddy was the one who was the fun parent. And it used to really hurt her feelings. But she said that now the fault line in the whole family system, the fracture of the whole family system around who's the fun parent is completely exposed now that daddy's home all the time. Because if she's trying to discipline, you have to do your math homework, daddy's saying, let's go into the living room and build a fort with sheets, you know, and the kids but dad's the fun parent, you know, it's sort of good cop, bad cop. And just how much contempt is arising in her in reference to this. Not only because her kids don't recognize her as the fun parent, but because she doesn't want to be the fun parent. So again, there's a lot of stress happening in our relationships right now, and you might find that these dynamics are present. Now, it makes sense. We can see sequentially here how all of this would lead to stonewalling. And stonewalling is exactly how it sounds. If I'm going to survive the criticism, the defensive energy that's living in this relationship, in this house, and the contempt, I've got a stonewall. And stonewall means I build a fortress around myself because it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to live this way for a really long period of time. So maybe as a child, I don't hear it anymore. I've just blocked myself from it. Maybe as significant others to each other, I just completely shut down. We don't sleep in the same bed anymore. We are like two ships passing in the night. Stonewalling can be the construction of what's called the wall of pleasantness. No matter what's going on, I'm just going to have a very pleasant demeanor. I'm not going to allow criticism, defensiveness, and contempt to penetrate this wall. And so the relationship really flatlines at that point. So stonewalling is a really incredible mode of preservation and means of survival. It's how we keep ourselves safe, but it's not a way to live, a fulfilling way to live in a close relationship. When you can return to a restaurant, and I know you've had this experience already, and you look around and you see two people that are having a meal together, not looking at each other, not speaking to each other, and you don't even have to know them, but you noticed it. Because what you noticed was you noticed the energy of the stone wall. We're no longer connected or connecting because it's too painful. Once you get to stonewalling, can you heal? Sure. Likely not without intervention, outside intervention. Can you heal? Sure. But only if you both have the realization that you both allowed yourselves to get so far down the path of this toxicity that you'd like to explore the possibility of reversing your course. Or if we go with the apocalypse analogy, the relationship at some point self-destructed. The relationship at some point blew up. And here we are in the debris of it all. Can we build something new? Nope, I didn't say rebuild. Because in extreme cases, we can't rebuild because we would never want to build again from the same materials. We're talking about a total gutting of the land and starting over again. And two people can do that. A family can do that. Two colleagues can do that. We can do that. But we can't do it alone. You know, we can't come charging in to any relationship, waving the white flag, saying, you know, the war is over, the apocalypse is done. We need to kick the 4 deadly horsemen out of our lives. Introducing these ideas inside of a family or with your partner can be really helpful, but only if the timing is right. The last thing you want to do is introduce this if you know it's present in a relationship, and be met with criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. So timing is really important here. Just as timing is important to our session. So we're coming close to the end of the hour. Where's the hope? Is there hope? Yes, and that's our topic for next week. Each one of these dynamics has an antidote. And that's where we're going to spend our time next week. What is the antidote to criticism? What is the antidote if defensiveness is present? What is the antidote to contempt and stonewalling? The final thought I want to leave you with, and this is a really important one, is something that I mentioned earlier, which is your relationship to self. When the stress is high, in what ways do you become self-critical in ways that can be really detrimental and damaging? In what ways do you take a defensive stance to your own relationship to you? Do you defend against it, even being present? Sometimes the mere words, what is your relationship to you like, will create an instant defense. I don't want to think about that. What is she talking about? I'm not coming back next week. That's not something that I'm interested in. That's not important. That's selfish. Or relationship to myself. I can't stand myself. Self-hatred, self-loathing, all forms of contempt. And then stonewalling against yourself. I am shut down to me. So between now and the next time we meet, remain hopeful that there are antidotes. And I would just like you to think about, how are these 4 horsemen present in my relationship to myself? Because healing these dynamics, the best way to heal them, and to sort of prevent them from becoming present in your most meaningful relationships, really begins with examining how these are acted out or played out inside of you. Sound good?
Yes.
Good. Well, I hope that was helpful. And next week, we're also going to finish our exploration into the protection of our relationship rights, which I believe we moved through the first 15. And we'll finish those up next week because they're very applicable to the content for next week. So that's what you have to look forward to. What are the antidotes to the 4 deadly horsemen of the apocalypse? And how might these dynamics be part of our own inner wiring, present in your relationship to you? Big sign that they're being acted out is when you feel really blue, you feel really anxious, really agitated. You can step back and even say, oh God, in what way right now am I being self-critical, really defensive, really full of contempt for myself, or just totally numb to me. So have a good week. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for always sharing.
Thank you,
Christine.
Crystal. Thank you.
Take care.
You.